So the engine block, as you guys can see, is rotating as the areas for the pistons. Everything bolts onto it. You can see where the crankshaft fits and bolts in, and we'll see the bearings assemble in a moment. And then the place for the thermostat for all the coolant to flow through. Obviously, the heart of your engine, the crankshaft, bearings are coming on, connecting rods to the pistons, held in by the king sleeves, which you guys don't necessarily need to know those parts. That all gets assembled. Literally, this is the way that it goes through in the assembly line. Makes sense. This is actually called your main seal. Keeps all the oil in the block. And then we have the flywheel to bolt onto it. Flywheel, as you guys know, is how the starter connects to actually turn over the crank in order to move the pistons up and down, so we can get that first spark so that we can carry the rest of your engine cycles through. Next is your really second most important item, which is your cylinder head. Right now it's just a cylinder head. We're about to add the valve train into it. There's no valves or anything, literally just that cast aluminum block. Your valves, your springs, and your locks to actually hold it up, intake and exhaust. Right there, these are your tappets, pretty much your upside down buckets that will allow the camshaft to push them in and up and down, which will allow no side pressure so that those seals actually wear as long as possible. Of course, your camshaft, this would be a dual overhead camshaft. The bearings that hold it down. You saw quickly the head gasket come down, which the head gasket links the cylinder head to the block, keep coolant in between everything, seals off your combustion chamber, and also allows your just similar metals, your aluminum and your steel block or cast iron block to actually be mounted together without having a corrosive issue. Your head bolts go in. You saw a second ago they put the timing gears on, and they just put the oil pump on down below, which you don't necessarily have to worry about for your video. Now we have your timing chain, but a timing belt functions the same way, keeps the camshaft synchronized with the crankshaft so that we can have the fuel come in at the right time and the exhaust valves open at the right time to save power and to run efficiently. Also, don't forget, on the other side of this, for the ignition system, we're going to have your throttle position sensor. Your throttle position sensor is going to send the signal to your computer where it will go two ways. It will take the signal and allow your spark to actually take place at the correct time, which would go to your ignition module, and it's also going to send the signal to your fuel injector so that they can spray in the fuel at the exact right time. And then they just have your tensioners, which hold everything in place, your timing chain cover, of course, this is your valve cover. Real main purpose is just to keep the debris out and to keep your oil flowing up from the top down to the bottom. Your oil pan. This is pretty much just your oil sensor. It is not on all cars. This would be on a Ford, as this is actually a Ford animation video, and it's going to test the chemical properties through the use of electricity to find out when the oil actually goes bad, which would bring on a service light telling you to change your oil. And then, of course, the oil filter, which bolts on. Right now, they are putting the thermostat housing on. Inside the thermostat housing would be our thermostat Thermostat, of course, is the device which opens and closes solely based on wax. When the temperature gets up, it expands, opening the valve, which allows your coolant to flow out to your radiator so that your radiator can cool it down with the passing air. Also on it would be your coolant temperature sensor. Coolant temperature sensor is going to take the information, since it's connected pretty much directly to the block of the coolant system, send that information to the computer so that the car knows when they can actually run off of the data so that they can run efficiently. If the computer does not get that information from the coolant temperature sensor, your car will constantly run rich, meaning it has too much gasoline, and become very effective with very bad gas mileage. Next, as we spoke of before, your starter is getting bolted onto the block. The Bendix, of course, will pop out and hit the flywheel gears when you start it. Now looks like they just added the camshaft sensor, and of course from your thermostat around to other devices, there's going to be coolant flowing. This would actually be called a bypass hose, allowing the coolant to stay circulated inside the engine all at one time instead of having the coolant get hot in individual cylinder areas. The water pump will keep it flowing all the way around. You can see them adding the intake manifold. I can tell it's the intake manifold for several different reasons. One, it is made out of plastic, which is a modern material that we make it out of. Two, we have your butterfly valve or your intake right here, which when you press the gas pedal, this valve is going to open and close, restricting or allowing air to pass through. On the side of that butterfly valve is always going to be your throttle position sensor. Throttle position sensor will pretty much tell the computer how much gas to add based on how much air is actually getting into the engine. Of course, your dipstick doesn't necessarily make the car run functionally, just allows us to check on it. You can see them adding your fuel injectors. They just dropped in our ignition coil over here. At the bottom of your ignition coil would be an ignition module. Module, once again, picks up the signal from your camshaft sensor and uses it to give a specific time of when to fire each coil. Coil increases your voltage from 12 volts up into much higher voltage from, let's say, around 30 to 40,000. It all depends on a specific vehicle. And then brings it down into each spark plug wire, which will then bring it to the spark plug. Now a few of our accessories. That, of course, is your water pump. For this one, it is going to be serpentine belt driven, since we've already watched the timing chain go on, but sometimes they are driven by the timing belt as well. The piece they just added over here is called an idler. Idler is just simply going to allow that serpentine belt to change directions or have it turn. Couple different things we can note right here. They just got done adding your pulley. This would be called your main drive pulley or accessory pulley. And a second ago, they added a crankshaft sensor. That sensor is going to pick up all these little nubs on this pulley and generate a signal, which is also going to go to the computer. Don't mind my dog going crazy. Then, of course, we're adding your air conditioning compressor on the side. Not necessarily needed for function, but in order to help you guys stay cool. If the air conditioner does go bad and you don't feel like changing it and paying for a new one on there, you can buy another pulley just to put here to keep direction without changing how your engine actually runs. I would have to wait to see what they attach this to. Not very clear on the picture, but I would say that that would be your power steering pump. Looks like they just added a tensioner down on the bottom, and then we just put on the alternator. You can tell simply mostly by your wires on the side, and then you'd have a large red wire coming off to go to the battery. So they just added the serpentine belt. This would be called a routing diagram. And of course, once again, since we're doing a web of terms associated with the engine, an easy way to link all your accessories is through that serpentine belt. Adding the exhaust manifold. Exhaust manifold, if we tracked it back, you could go back to your valves. Your exhaust valves then go to your camshaft. Your camshaft then comes down to your timing belt or chain, down to the crankshaft inside. Then just a manifold cover. Keep the heat in. Then many times on newer modern cars, to make them look good, they just have a engine cover that goes over top of it. Now on your PowerPoint as well, you can link things through mechanical, electrical, through a coolant connection. So physically, you can see that we have your crankshaft getting driven by the power stroke of the piston. So the piston to the connecting rod turns the crank. The crank is connecting the transmission through the flywheel, or we could say the flywheel also is connected to the starter. There is many correct ways to do it. On the far side, you can see our timing chain, which is coming up and is in charge of turning the camshaft at the correct time so that we can have the valves open and close in a proper sequence. Any of which you guys can use for sentences to link things together. And of course, as this is running, the accessory belt would also be turning the water pump. Water pump is going to be keeping coolant running around the engine in order to keep everything from not overheating. Once it reaches optimum temperature, the thermostat would open, allowing coolant out to the radiator. Once again, right now, obviously the timing of your intake and exhaust valves are completely key. Blue would be your intake. Intake, compression, power, and exhaust. Your red is your exhaust. Great picture right here showing the block on the outside. These passageways here would be where the coolant can actually be pumped through, and it encompasses the whole block, allowing the engine to maintain that nice optimal temperature so that the engine doesn't overheat. So can we link the block and the water pump together? Absolutely. You could do it either through a physical term or through the coolant. Coolant then, of course, is going to touch the thermostat, which is in the thermostat housing. Hopefully you guys are catching these because there are several ways to actually link each and any of these together. As this is going up and down, the oil pump actually is pushing oil in many places. It's flashing it on the side. There also is going to be passages that the oil is going up inside the piston.